Hi, thank you for joining me in this examination of the Connecticut State Department of Education's English Language Proficiency Growth Model. My name's Michael Sabatis, and I'm a consultant in the performance office, and I was fortunate to be a member of the team that developed the growth model. I can tell you that three key principles guided our work. One was trying to create a growth model that was fair and equitable for students, highlighting their growth towards English language proficiency. The second was to create a model that had targets, meaningful targets, that would move students towards proficiency within a reasonable number of years. And a third principle that guided our work was also creating a model that educators and administrators could use, could understand, and track their students' progress towards achieving English language proficiency. Now, before we get going, I do want to say a word as far as how we refer to these students. For several years now, the standard has been to refer to them as English learners. However, we're in a period of transition. An increasing alternative is to refer to these students as multilingual learners, thus highlighting that these are students who have some level of proficiency in more than one language. So I'm going to use those terms interchangeably through this presentation. So in this presentation, we're going to start by looking at the English language proficiency assessment. An assessment that's required for all multilingual learners to annually participate in. And while parents may refuse English language support services, they cannot refuse the participation of their students in that annual English language proficiency assessment. We're also going to look at how the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, really changed the way states look at and incorporate this concept of growth, English language proficiency growth, how they track it, and how they incorporate it in their accountability models. We'll also give a description of Connecticut's ELP growth model. We'll take a look at how to interpret the student growth target tables, so that when you look at them, you can see and understand where your students are at and their targets and how they move across the different years towards proficiency. We're also going to look at growth measures, the different growth measures that are available to report and to sort of track and understand the growth the students are achieving. We're going to look specifically at how the growth model is incorporated into the CSDE's next generation accountability system. And we're also going to look at how you can access public Lost Links growth results at the aggregate level for your district, for the state, and for other districts, but also how you can track or find your students' individual results in our secure reporting portal. So when we talk about the English language proficiency assessment, we begin with the federal mandate that all English learners in grades K to 12 annually participate in the assessment of their English language proficiency. And a required component of this assessment, and states are allowed to select the individual assessment. However, that assessment must include the content areas of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And this ELP assessment is used to determine which ELs have demonstrated sufficient English language mastery such that they can exit EL status in the following school year. So this assessment really has implications for each student who participates in terms of the services that they will be receiving and their continued participation on the English language proficiency assessment. So in Connecticut, the assessment that we've selected for quite a long time is called the Lost Links. And the Lost Links has had various incarnations It's had various forms over time. Forms A and B, which were used from 2007-8 through 2012-13, these forms really emphasize more the basic interpersonal communication skills, or BICS. Forms C and D were a revision that included more cognitive and academic language items among the test items. And those, we were using these forms from 2013-14 through 2020-21. And starting in this past school year, 2021-22, we have moved to forms E and F. And E and F were unique in that they incorporated more feedback from educators across the country, including Connecticut educators, to develop forms and test items that enhanced the student experience and were more culturally appropriate for this group of students. And the last links, it includes the required listening, speaking, reading, and writing subtests. But it also adds 5 additional skill areas or modalities that are called composites. And really, they're combinations of the 4 subtests. And so these include overall, which is an average of the 4 subtests, oral, literacy, comprehension, and productive. Now, on the test for each of these subtests and composites, students receive, first of all, a vertical scale score. And that's a numeric. And what that is it's taking the raw score, the number of correct answers the student chose, and it converts that into a scale score based on the difficulty of the items that the student answered correctly. And it's also, we refer to it as a vertical scale score, because all of the scale scores for each of these subtests and composites are on one scale that runs from grades K through grade 12. Now, of course, each grade has its particular section on that scale, but what it allows it to, because it's scaled on one scale, what this allows is to be able to track a student across multiple years and really be able to measure and look at their progress from one school year to the next. Students also receive, for each of the subtests and composites, a performance level. And these are essentially descriptors of student skills and abilities based on a particular range of the vertical scale score. And really, they provide educators and parents with a meaningful description of a student's abilities and skill levels based on their scale, on their vertical scale score. Now, to understand the current growth model, it's important to take a step back and look at the accountability model that was in place prior to ESSA for our multilingual learners. And essentially, they had their own accountability system separate from the Title I accountability. And these were called annual measurable achievement objectives. And these were percentages of students who achieved 3 different distinct, the percentage of students who were achieving 3 different goals. The first was the percentage of students who were demonstrating overall proficiency. The second was the percentage of students who were demonstrating growth towards English language proficiency. So this is, again, about growth. And what's significant here and what's different is that growth was defined as any increase in the student's vertical scale score. So even if a student grew, their scale score increased 1 point from one year to the next, that student was deemed as having met growth or demonstrating growth. The problem here is that this growth isn't really defined towards any particular goal. It's just simply numeric growth. The third target was the percentage of the L subgroup that were meeting the No Child Left Behind proficiency goals for ELA and math on the Title I academic assessments. And typically, students, it was very rare for the English language learner group to meet these targets because these were the same targets that were shared by their native English speaking students. One set of targets for everybody on these assessments under NCLB. So it was very unlikely, and we rarely saw this group meet this target. So ESSA is so significant because it turns on its head this concept and really fleshes out the concept of growth. So this is a quote from the ESSA law, and I want to highlight a couple of sections of this. So first of all, it's drawing attention and asking the states to focus on the progress that students are making towards achieving English language proficiency. So first of all, it's putting the focus on progress as opposed to some point in time measure of overall proficiency. Secondly, it's defining progress in terms of students moving towards English language proficiency. So now it's not just a numeric increase in their score or moving from one proficiency level to the next. It's about moving these students towards overall proficiency. So that's the larger context now that progress is being put into. And it's also the final comment too is very significant. Within, it's looking at progress within a state determined time limit. So what it's asking states to do is to define a period of time that growth and setting growth targets is going to move a student towards proficiency. So for the state of Connecticut, when we reviewed national research on the acquisition of English language proficiency, the state opted to set a time period of 5 years. So we wanted to develop a growth model that would move students towards proficiency if the student was meeting the targets within 5 years. So when you talk about growth, there's many ways of looking at it and understanding growth. So one way is achievement change. And here what you're doing is you're comparing student achievement across years. So for example, if you wanted to look at the performance of students in, say, grade 4 in 2021 and compare that to students in grade 4 in students in 2021-22. And the problem here is, while that might give you some information, the problem is it's not the same group of students. So it's really hard to say what growth occurred. Any changes you might see really just might be about that you now are looking at a different group of students. Another way of looking at change is called the rough cohort. And what you're doing is you're comparing the performance of students in one grade in 1 year to the performance of students in the next higher grade in the following year. So for example, if you compared students in grade 3 in 2021 to students in grade 4 in 2021-22. So again, a lot of those students are going to be in both of those grades. However, it's not necessarily all the same students because some might have left and some might have entered the district and are now in grade 4. So it gives you some idea, but it's not exactly the same set of students from 1 year to the next. The third way of looking at growth is called the match cohort. And this is the method that is built into our growth model. And what you're doing is you're comparing the performance of the same group of students from 1 year to the next year. So those same group of students who were in year 1 last year with those students who are now in the higher grade this year, in the next higher grade this year. And like I said, this is the approach that we've adopted. So we're comparing the same students. We're looking at the same students' growth over time in the Connecticut ELP growth model. So how did we get to this? How did we build this model? So we took over 48,000 Connecticut students and analyzed and looked at their growth from school years 2013-14 to 2014-15, and from 2014-15 to 2015-16. And we looked at their growth. And we tried out different models to see, and setting different groups of targets to see what moves students, what will move all students to proficiency within 5 years. And these targets that we came up with, what we're talking about is the increase in the number of their vertical scale score points that a student is expected to achieve from 1 year to the next school year. And they're individualized targets in that they're based on a student's English language proficiency level in the prior school year. So we're taking into account where the student was in the prior school year in assigning them a target. So each student has an individualized target. And what's important to note here, I know I often get questions about this, the way the USDE described the model, the growth models, they allowed us to take into account the student's prior proficiency level, but they didn't let us take into account other demographic factors, such as a student's native language, or if the student is one with disabilities. So we can't set separate targets for students with disabilities, for example. It's one set of shared targets. But they are individualized on this based on the student's English language proficiency level in the prior school year. And as we've noted a few times here, all of these targets are designed to move students to proficiency within 5 years if they're meeting their targets. So in selecting how we were going to measure growth, we decided to focus on 2 composite scores, the oral scale score and the literacy scale score. The oral scale score is the combination, it's the average of the speaking vertical scale score divided by the listening vertical scale score. The literacy scale score is the reading scale score plus the writing scale score divided by 2. So the average of those 2 things. And the reason we opted for composite scores as opposed to the subtests is the composite scores include more test items than any individualized subtest. So that provides greater reliability and validity in terms of where the student really, where their skill level lies. So that's why we opted to use those measures. Now, let's talk about understanding the particular growth targets and how they move students towards proficiency. So I know this table has a lot of numbers, it can be confusing, but it's pretty easy to decode. So let's do that. So because we're looking at growth, we're tracking students across a set of years. So that first column here tells us what year or what grade was the student in the prior school year. So that first row, what we're saying here is last year, the student was in kindergarten. And the first set of numbers, or the range, are the vertical scale scores that correspond to each of the columns. And those are the 5 performance levels that exist for the composite scores on the last links. So that first box, that tells us that that range, the vertical scale score range for level 1 in kindergarten, is between 300 and 429. The number underneath is the target that we expect. It's the number of vertical scale score points that we're looking for the student to increase their score by when they take the test again in first grade. So we're expecting a student who was a level 1 in kindergarten for oral to increase their scale score by 61 points when they take the test again in first grade. That's their target. So let me also comment, we sort of blocked off and highlighted levels 4 and 5. Level 4 is proficiency and level 5 is above proficiency. And remember, the overall goal of this is to move students towards proficiency. So if, let's say, a student who takes the test in kindergarten hits the proficiency level, if they need to take the test again in first grade, we're not going to give them a particular numeric scale score target. Their goal is just to maintain proficiency, because remember, that's the goal of the model, is to get the students to proficiency. So for students who are level 4 and 5 in the prior year and are taking the test again, their goal is just to maintain proficiency. As long as they stay in that range, they've met their target. Whether their score is going up or down, doesn't matter. If they're proficient, they've met their target. So let's walk through a particular example and see how you can track a student from year to year using this table. So let's say we have a student who takes the test in kindergarten and they score the lowest score. They get a 300. So they are a brand new beginner in terms of oral level proficiency. So if they've got a score of 300, then that means they're at level 1. So they're in that first block. So when they take the test again, we're looking for them, their target is to increase their score by 61 scale score points. So let's say the student takes the test in first grade and they actually increase their score by 65 points. So they've met their target. However, they still remain in performance level 1, you'll note. So if you look at that second row, grade level 1, they're still in the performance level of 1. They're towards the middle. And that's okay. And that's one of the things that we want to highlight in this growth model, is that we recognize that a student can make significant growth and still remain in the same performance level. So as they move from the bottom of a level towards the middle, or even the top of a level, that's significant growth that can occur as long as they're meeting their target. So that student who who grew 65 points, that means in first grade their score would be 365. They're still a level 1, so we see their target is 68. So we're expecting when they take the test again in second grade that they're going to increase their score by a minimum of 68 scale score points. So, okay, so the student takes the test in second grade, and let's say they grow 70 points. So now their score is 435. They're still a performance level 1, but they're near the top. Their target is 59 scale score points when they take the test again in third grade. So we're looking for that amount of increase when they take the test again. And let's say in third grade, they increase their score by 60. So they've met their target again. Now, the interesting thing here is that gives them a scale score of 495, and that puts them in a proficiency level of 3. So now they've moved from basic to intermediate level, skipping level 2, early intermediate. And that can happen, especially as students are at the upper level, the upper end of the range for level 1, because those targets are generally big, because students generally demonstrate higher growth at a level 1. So this student has skipped over level 2 and moved to level 3. And now we see that when they take the test again in grade 4, their target is 28 points. So let's say in grade 4 they take it and their score increases 30 to 525. Well, now they've reached proficiency. And if they have to take the test again because they haven't met overall mastery, their goal is just to maintain proficiency. Doesn't matter, their individual scale score doesn't matter as long as they stay in the proficient range. And so that's how meeting the targets can help any student move to proficiency within 5 years. So our example was a student who came in and got the lowest scale score. And just by meeting their target every year, they moved to proficiency within 5 years. I've also included the oral growth targets for students in grades 6 through 12 here. And it works exactly like as we just saw in our example. The literacy targets, they work the same way as the oral targets work. And so let's walk through an example here. It's work the same way as oral, but let's take an example and walk through the table. And again, we've got the 5 levels. We've got what the grade was in the prior school year. We've got our ranges and we've got our target. So let's start with another example. So let's say we have a student in kindergarten, and again, they're getting the lowest scale score, so a 220. So that puts them at level 1. So their target when they take the test again in first grade is we're looking for them to grow 111 scale score points. So let's say the student takes the test in first grade and they grow 120, and it gives them a 340 overall. So we see in first grade that puts them near the top of level 1, but still, again, the same level 1. So again, we're recognizing growth that's occurring within the same performance level. So when they take the test again, that student's target is now 96 for when they take the test in grade 2. So let's say that the student takes the test and they increase their score by 100. So now their score is a 440. So that puts them in level 2. So their target now for when they take the test in grade 3 is an increase of 49 vertical scale score points. So, okay, the student takes the test in grade 3 and they grow by 50 points. And so now they have a score of 490. And we see now that they've moved to performance level 3, intermediate level. So their target for grade 4, when they take the assessment again, is 44 vertical scale score points. So let's say the student takes the test in grade 4 and they grow 60 points, and it gives them a 550. So that 550 now moves them into a level 4 or proficient. So if for whatever reason they have to take the Lost Links assessment again, the goal would just be for them to maintain their proficiency. However, again, this example highlights that students meeting the targets are moving to proficiency within 5 school years, our overall target for all of our multilingual learners. I've included the targets and the charts for kids in grades 6 through 12 for literacy. Now let's talk about how we report and talk about growth, because there's different metrics, different ways of explaining or demonstrating growth. One is the growth rate. And I think this is something that most of us are familiar with. It's just a simple percentage of how many of these students met their growth target. So let's say you're in a district that has 1,000 multilingual learners and 500 of them met their target. Well, 500 divided by 1,000 is 50%. So half of your kids met their growth targets. The problem with this metric is, while it gives you useful information, and we certainly report it as part of our accountability reporting, the shortcoming with it is that you have students who are demonstrating growth, but because they didn't meet their growth target, that information isn't being captured in a growth rate. So let's say you have a student who is expected to grow 100 scale score points, and they grew 80. Well, they're a student who didn't meet their target. However, they demonstrated pretty significant growth, and this measure just doesn't capture that. So an alternate measure is called the average percentage of target achieved. So for each student, what we're looking at here is what percentage of their target did the student achieve? So in our example, that student who had a target of 100 and grew 80, well, their percentage of target achieved is 80%. So if you wanted to look at a group of students, across a group of students, and say, on average, what percentage of our target, what percentage of the target was being achieved by my students, you would take all of their growth targets and average them. And you would get a metric which would reflect all of the growth that's being achieved by your students, not just those who met their target, but all of your students would be included in that metric. And that's the advantage when we talk about average percentage of target achieved, or for short, APTA. So let's take a look at a hypothetical example. Let's take a look at a hypothetical example, a simple one. So let's say you're looking at a particular class and there are 4 multilingual learners in that class. And just for simplicity's sake, let's say every one of those students had a growth target of 60. And so student 1, they grew 42 points, so they didn't meet their target. The second student grew 60 points, they did. Third student grew 66, they met and actually exceeded their target. The last student grew 36, so another one who didn't meet their target. Now, if we were going to talk about growth rate for this classroom, we would say 2 of 4 met their target, so 50%. The growth rate would be 50%. However, across these 4 students, if we wanted to talk about the average percentage of the target achieved, what we could do is add up all the growth that these 4 students demonstrated, which would be 204 points, and divide it by the combined targets, 240. And we'd see that on average, for these students, they met 85% of their target, of their targets. Another way of doing it also would just be taking the percentage, the individual percentage of target achieved for each of these students, and dividing. So some caveats when you look at and the way that we process students in doing the accountability calculations. First of all, we cap the percentage of the target achieved at 110%, because we don't want a couple of students who maybe hit it out of the ballpark in terms of how much they achieve, sort of skewing the average. So we cap it at 110%. Another thing is that percentage of target achieved can't fall below 0%. So if a student's score actually declines, we're going to cap it at 0%. There aren't going to be any negative percentages included in any accountability calculations. And again, as I've mentioned a couple of times, students who achieved proficiency in the prior school year must maintain proficiency when they take the LOS-LINKs in the current school year. So some examples here. Student A, their target was 100 scale score point growth, and their actual growth was 150. Let's say they scored 150. So their actual percentage of target achieved is 150%. Well, we're going to cap that for that student at 110% when we do the calculation. However, if you look up that student in one of our secure reporting portal, you will see their actual scores. This is just giving you an insight into the way we're calculating the accountability. Student B, same thing. Their target was 100 scale score points, and their score actually went down by 40. So their actual percentage of target achieved is negative 40%. Well, we're not going to include that in the accountability calculation. We're going to cap that at 0. We're going to just treat that as 0%. Student C, they're taking the test again after having met proficiency in the prior school year. Their goal is to maintain proficiency, and they did. So their adjusted PTA is 100% because they met their target. They're still proficient. Student D, same situation. They were they took the test already, they met proficiency. They're taking in the current school year, however, they fall below proficiency. Well, their PTA is 0% because they did not meet their target. Okay, so this is a snapshot of a school accountability report for a K-5 school, including all the different measures that will go into accountability. And English language proficiency will be incorporated into the state's accountability model as of school year 2021-2022. And here we see the target for oral and literacy growth is 100% of students meeting their growth targets, their individualized growth targets. And what's at stake here is that schools can earn up to 50 points based on the average percentage of students meeting their oral targets, and 50 points for students meeting their literacy targets. So a total of 100 points at stake for a school. In general, we've kind of done some calculations for K-5 schools. Up to about 10% of their overall accountability measure could come from ELP growth. For high schools, it's a couple of percentage points lower. So how we do this, how we include this. Our rules for including a student in these calculations, the student, first of all, has to have oral and literacy vertical scale scores in the prior school year and in the current school year so that we can measure their growth. That student also has to have grade progression. In other words, their grade has to have increased from the prior school year to the current school year. So those students who are kept back a year are not included in the calculation, nor are those students if they skip a grade, more than a grade. So you don't have succession of grades from one school year to the next. They're not included in the calculation either. Students have to have been with the same school on October 1 of the current school year to be included in these calculations. The other thing is these calculations are only done for schools that have 20 or more ELs who meet all of these requirements. And how we actually translate and APTA into accountability points is this calculation here. Essentially, it's the number of points, the 50 points times the APTA. So let's say we have a hypothetical school and their students' oral APTA was 65% and their literacy APTA was 55%. So the calculation for the oral is 50, the scale score point, or the accountability points that are up for grabs, times 0.65 equals 33 points. For literacy, 50 times 0.55 equals 28. So this hypothetical school would have earned 61 total points towards their accountability score from ELP growth. So now, where can you find your results? The State Department has two very important data reporting portals. First of all, there's EdSite Public, where aggregate performance measures are provided. And there is a LostLinks growth report available where you can find information on not only your district, but also the state as a whole. And you can also look at other districts. And you can filter for particular things like a grade. You can look at by school. And you can also filter by whether we're talking about students with disabilities or not. But the great thing about EdSite Public is it allows you to give your numbers a context. You can compare yourself to the state as a whole, or you can pick districts that you consider particularly similar to you, either in terms of size or socioeconomic standard, and make apples to apples comparisons of how your students are doing compared to either other districts or the state as a whole. Another data reporting portal that the State Department of Ed provides districts is called EdSite Secure. And all districts have access to EdSite Secure, and they determine, each district has accounts with EdSite Secure, and they manage those accounts, who gets in, and they determine who gets access to EdSite Secure among their staff. EdSite Secure not only provides aggregate figures for growth on the lost links, but also you can find individualized student results. And you can download all of this information. And the really good thing too about EdSite Secure is you can not only see the results of the students that you tested, but there's also a view within in EdSite Secure that allows you to see the results of your students who aren't currently registered to you, but who were tested in other Connecticut districts. So you can see at any time the growth metrics for students who are currently registered to you. And it's a wonderful resource. So I would highly recommend for all Title III directors and any English language assessment coordinators to have access to EdSite Secure, because there's a great deal of actionable information at your fingertips when you're able to get into EdSite Secure. Now, another thing that ESSA guided or required the states to do was to create what are called milestone targets, and in particular milestone targets for ELP growth. And I would just say that we report these milestone targets, but they are aspirational. They're not actually incorporated in the accountability system. But these are our goals for states to, for districts to use as targets for guiding getting students to meet oral and literacy growth. So what these targets do are they create trajectories to move districts, multilingual learners, to 100% of those students meeting their growth targets within 13 years. And so we have the State Department has established targets that run from 2017 through school year 2017-18 through school year 2029-30 that culminate in 100% of each district's multilingual learners meeting their growth targets. Let's look at how we calculated those. So we used school year 2016-17 as our baseline. And we know that the end goal is in 13 years for students, 100% of students to meeting their targets. So the formula is 100% minus whatever the percentage of kids meeting their growth targets was in 2016-17. So the APTA in 2016-17. So let's say a hypothetical district, their oral APTA was in 74% in 2016-17. So 100 minus 74 is 26, divided by 13, the 13 years, equals 2% annual increase in the percentage of kids meeting their oral ELP growth target. So we can see 2016-17, it was 74%. The next year, 76%, then 78%, on and on until it culminates in 100% of students meeting their oral growth targets. And literacy is exactly the same. So again, a hypothetical district, let's say their literacy APTA was 61% in school year 2016-17. So 100% minus 61% is 39, divided by 13 is 3% annual increase in the percent of APTA, or in other words, students meeting their literacy growth targets. So for this hypothetical district, 61% to 64% to 67%, on and until it culminates in 100% of students meeting their target. So I understand that was a lot of information, but I want to step back and just kind of talk about some conclusions on this growth model. First of all, the growth model is intended to draw everybody's attention to English learners. That's one of the primary goals here, and to focus that on growth as opposed to some point in time measure of proficiency. Also, the establishing of individualized targets that move students to proficiency within a 5-year period if the student is meeting their targets. Also, providing a tool for district administrators and teachers to monitor students' progress towards English language proficiency, and hopefully provide information that districts and administrators can use to make programmatic decisions about their students. So I want to thank you for accessing this training module. I understand that this was a lot of information in a quick amount of time. So if you have any questions, I am more than happy to answer them. You can reach me at my email address here or my phone number. And I would also draw attention to, there is a LostLinks growth methodology report that is available in EdSite. We've got the link here. So this can also provide answers to your questions, and particularly if you have questions about the calculations itself that went into creating the model. So again, I want to thank you for your attention and your concern about multilingual learners, and I wish you a good day. Thank you.